This morning we want to talk about the functions of the family as Rushdoony has addressed the concept. It was a fairly interesting chapter, not one that I find anything to disagree with, really not even to question a lot of. A lot of times I come to these lessons, I read his chapters and go, well, there's a presupposition there that I could question, that we could challenge. Didn't find a whole lot of that when it comes to the functions of the family. But we do want to start by asking the question at the outset, what would we consider to be the functions of the family? And from a human perspective, perhaps this is beyond the purposes of the family, but even some of the byproducts, just some of the things that families end up doing without being intentional about it or even us really thinking through it much. Some functions of the family are very, very obvious. Rushdoony brings out a few that I had not really thought about in such terms. And even some of them I would not consider purposes, but very, very beneficial byproducts. So do you guys at the outset have any thoughts on the functions, what families do? Not just why we have them, but what they do.
There's a term that gets thrown around. It's just a two-letter term, grow up. Right? You got to grow up. Right? That gets thrown around all the time. Okay. I'm convinced that the weaker the family, the less growing up actually gets done. Okay. And to illustrate, I might have mentioned this before, the TV show American Idol is used to be very intriguing to me. It was intriguing to me that people would come in and they can't sing and thought that they could. Right? And they can't.
Yep. It would be like me trying to go on that show.
It wouldn't work.
Would not work.
It wouldn't work too well for me. I used to watch that, we used to discuss it as a family, what was going on there. Mm-hmm. And what I said to my own children was, and we talked about this, and you know what, this show works because it's entertaining to look at these people who can't sing and to laugh at them. It's entertaining. And that's what made the show work in the beginning. And I would say to my children, you know what, as we talk about this show works because the American family is fair. In this sense, in a real healthy family, and a lot of those people came and thought they were saying, I noticed it was single parent families. It was mom telling the children, oh, you can do anything.
Anything you want.
Anything you want. You can do this, right? And I remember thinking, you know what, in a healthy family, where mom and dad are healthy, you have a healthy influence, they'll be like, you know what, you can't sing, you are not going to go on that show and embarrass yourself and us. You're not going to do it. That's what happens in a healthy family. You are forced to grow up. When you're done with a healthy family, you're not forced to grow up. And I would argue that one of the functions of the family is simply forcing people to grow up. It's reality. You meet that in a healthy family.
Right, learning those hard lessons, hard truths, but better to learn them out of that family than on national TV.
It's so wonderful in a healthy family because you're still accepted, but you can still be told, hey, you're doing that wrong, and you don't have to have a 4-week counseling session to recover. I'm still accepted in this family, but I just got told what it is. It's a wonderful thing, and it's only possible, I believe, in a healthy family.
I agree. That's something you don't find outside of a healthy family. There's a placing and a protection in that, which is something that Rushdoony does address a little bit. But your example hits on several points that he makes. John?
I'm coming in late, but did somebody say civilization?
Not yet.
You are civilizing your children, making them civil. How to interact with the rest of the world. You're teaching them civility.
And I think Rushdoony hits on that in a roundabout way, but not that directly on the broad view of it. Very, very good point. Any other thoughts initially on the functions of the family, what the family ends up doing, intentionally or not.
You'll probably hit on this, but Rushini makes a point of welfare.
Yes.
And he makes, and I hadn't really thought until I read that, but he makes a point, as I recall, that there's no entity that dispenses welfare anywhere close to the efficiency of the family.
Can't even pretend.
Yeah, I probably got ahead of that.
From each, according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, is Marxist philosophy that only works in the family.
It's the only place.
It's the only place it works.
Only place. Because there's no motivation outside of it.
Outside.
There's no motivation outside of it. So,
Love? If your parents don't love each other, are you going to learn love the way a kid whose parents do love each other and both love you?
right. Love, true love, is taught.
It is not innately built into us the way it ought to be. And that's because of the corruptive nature of our sin. Very good, Stella.
Well, love that movie. Probably shouldn't, but then do.
Well, it's intriguing that Marx hated the family so much.
It is.
He hated the family because I think he did know that his principles worked there, and he didn't want that. He hated God, and anything that looked like God, the family presented him with God, and he hated it.
And he abandoned his family, and then some of them starved to death. Some of his children starved to death.
I did not realize that.
Yes.
Two of them. Maybe a third of them got sick. There's some question about that. He's a really bad.
Well, it is interesting that you bring up Marx, because Marx very much is a statist. And as I went through this chapter in Law and Liberty, Rushdoony is not just teaching what the family does, but he is very much discussing what the family does or ought to be doing, and how the state has usurped each of those points. How the state has done everything it can to replace the family. And so it, beyond simply teaching what families do or should do, he is arguing against statism in a roundabout kind of way. I don't know that that was necessarily his point. He doesn't state that in this chapter, but it comes out very, very clearly to me when you go through it. So as we go through these points, he makes 7 different points about what the family ought to be doing, what the functions are. And with each of them, we want to ask the question, initially, do we agree with him? He does not write scripture. He studies it well for us. But it's always worth asking, do we agree or disagree with him? How do we see his point if we agree, or how do we see it otherwise if we disagree? But we want to also consistently ask on all of these, how do we see the state usurping these roles? And what do we need to do about it? So those are kind of the 3 questions we want to ask for each of these slides, each of these points. And I think the state discussion is going to be the emphasis for our discussion today. First, he says that the family serves as the central institution for law and in society. It is the central. Everything societally seems to be built around the family structure. Agree, disagree? How so, why so?
You simply look at the discipline structure. I mean, households in which uphold standards of right and wrong, which uphold the ideas of discipline, consequences for actions, accountability, typically those children serve to be much more functional in society and beneficial for the whole of the community. And you clearly see what happens when you have, a system where there is no accountability, there is no discipline, there's no structure in that form. It is lawless, and so it simply becomes lawless as it grows up, and it just transfers lawlessness into the streets. So, I think it has to start there.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts?
There's a question about the centrality of the institution. Clearly, the family is the smallest societal unit that you're going to have. An individual isn't society. There's no society with an individual. But in a family, now you start to have society and interaction. So then the question ends up, is it central? As the point he's making here is it's the central institution. It means all the other institutions revolve around the family. And so now we have to address that question. What about the centrality of it? Is that the way it's supposed to be? And
Fair question.
Is the family serving as the central institution in society? So I just want to throw the question out and in a sense kind of rephrase it. Is it necessarily central?
John, are you asking, should it be, or is it?
He's saying, that statement says, it serves as, so it says it is.
Yeah.
So, I want to examine it, that's not just wanted to beat it around. I have my own ideas.
So thoughts to that? Is and should the family be this central to every other institution in society?
Well, I mean, just using a biblical model, God gave, it's true that God gave Adam as the individual charge to take dominion, but I would argue he also gave Eve to help him accomplish that goal. He's made family to be the very basis of the very vehicle which carries out that which he had commanded. I mean, Adam certainly had personal responsibility, but it's very clear. God said Eve is the helpmate to help him accomplish what it is he's been called to do. Family from the beginning is the very thing which God has ordained to bring about what he has said should happen. I would argue yes. Yes, it is.
So I would just, those kind of questions I would ask, if it's not, what is? If the family is, what is anything, then if so, what is the central institution?
I don't know that I could answer other than the family. Largely because the family is the smallest building block. If you don't have that building block, you can't build a society, would be my thought on it. John?
Until we redefine the family in terms of Christian family. Brothers and sisters, now you're getting a big family.
Large extension.
Not the family we're talking about here, or is it?
Rushduni is talking about the traditional nuclear biological family. He very much is. Though I think even he would allow for some exceptions to a degree. But what he is addressing here very much in this context is the nuclear traditional biological family.
So that's you and mommy and me and Bruce, Libby, Jack.
Exactly. I think, Conrad,
So
you had something.
does central mean foundational in this sentence? Is that?
I think it could appropriately be interpreted and understood that way, yes. That everything comes back to it to address it as family unit.
I think you can kind of settle both sides of this by saying the family is the central institution. But that doesn't mean that you can't violate God's law and remove it as that. Like you consider the crankshaft as a central part of an engine. Yeah, you can take the crankshaft out of an engine and say that it's not, but the engine's not going to run. So you can destroy the family deliberately, but the society then will not operate.
Great. Any other thoughts? Pastor?
I didn't think I was going to go here, but I'm thinking about this. At first I was going to say, well, the family serves as the central institution in law and in a healthy society.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I actually think I'm getting away from it. Here's why. When I don't want to keep doing this. When I was in South Africa, 5 years from now, it'll be
Too late.
It might be. Welcome to South Africa.
Certainly can.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. Thanks. I used to do, when I was a youth pastor, I used to do the when I was in Vietnam thing. Of course, I was never in Vietnam. It worked on some of them. Yeah, when I was in Vietnam. But anyway, in those squatter camps, that should be a place that the family haters really love, because they don't have families there. When you go in there, there's little kids wandering around. I mean, little kids just wandering around. There's no protection for women there, for example, and there's almost no homes where there's a father and a mother. They don't have families. So I'm back to what he's saying here. Serves as a central institution in law and society, because in those squatter camps, I would argue, well, I know you don't have law. You have chaos. And you really don't have society. So I'm back to agreeing with his statement, pretty much as is. Serves as a central institution in law and society, because from what I saw there, they don't have families, they don't have law, they don't have society.
At the very least, not healthy, but certainly arguable. A couple of points that I thought were interesting. In the United States tax structure, dealing with the IRS and their policy, even the IRS recognizes the family structure in their code. So it becomes central. I mean, that's your tax status, that your family structure establishes that. In most places, in any kind of investigation where police are investigating, children cannot be questioned without their parents present, unless, of course, their parents are completely absent. But parents have a right to be there when their children are questioned. Generally speaking, inheritances, when a man dies, his property goes to the family unless there's a will stating otherwise. But state law often, after the state gets their chunk, will default property as an inheritance to family. I think in our context, there is still a measure where our current law is very much centrally based on family structure. Not entirely, not perfectly, certainly, but there's still a hint of a concept there. So that means that's where it automatically goes without someone saying otherwise. Okay. So how do we see the state usurping this role of the family as the central institution, as being so central to law? Do we see the state trying to undermine that? Or are they happy to leave well enough alone in that? John?
You could argue that the state should be bearing the sword and only punishing wrongdoing and have no other role. I mean, that's the way the Bible presents it. So in that sense, what you're saying is that although the state has laws saying this is how your estate should be disposed of in the absence of a will if you die intestate, that they should have no role there. So there's a situation of the state stepping in, doing something that in this case we agree with, but usurping the authority.
Right.
It would be automatic that if a father dies, that his family would simply keep the goods that they're all using. His wife and children would gain that inheritance automatically because they're in possession of it. The tax code is engineered to do societal engineering. So it's designed to reward families. We could argue that, okay, we like that, but are they usurping a role?
Right. Should they have anything to say about
They
it
don't
at
have
all?
anything to say about it at all. Of course not, they shouldn't even be collecting those taxes.
Right, from the get-go.
But yes, the state sees itself as savior and sees itself as a central institution in law and society. All the rest of us are here to serve the state. Witness that we pay our debt to society when we're caught breaking society's laws. We don't pay restitution, we pay restitution to the state.
State, to the society.
So, I mean, the state has put itself as a central institution at every opportunity, and nobody's pushed back. Have they usurped it, or have we simply given it away?
I would think we've done both. I think that has happened on both sides. Any other thoughts on that question? How?
The fact that we are seeing that the state is, and in this case, when I say the state, I mean specifically things like the Supreme Court, it is seeking to redefine even what the family is, therefore it is seeking to be a central institution of law and also the definer of society. So in that, it shows itself to be reaching for power which it recognizes is threatened by the actual biblical family.
Agree?
What does the Supreme Court do?
Supreme Court claims the authority to make final decisions on what we call upper level cases. Sometimes murders, usually constitutional issues. When someone says, well, this law enforcement officer did not honor my constitutional right, they could take that on up. Or if there's a lawsuit between states amongst each other, or even individuals can take a state to court, that would go to Supreme Court, oftentimes if they continue to appeal. So those are just a couple of things at the Supreme Court, but they claim the authority to make a final decision, and that their decision can't be wrong.
Should they have the right to do that?
That's where the idea of being a Supreme Court should not be. They should not be allowed to call themselves supreme, because in doing that, they place themselves above God. Moving on. Rushdoony says that the family serves as the institution for the procreation and rearing of children. Having babies. Agree, disagree? Yeah. It's a pretty straightforward one, I think. Though not as much as it ought to be. But we've got two issues, procreation and rearing.
Have the right to raise their children the way they want.
I agree still. Brian?
I was just going to point out the last question or statement said the central, which means there could be other institutions involved.
Sure.
Somewhat. And in this statement, there is just one. Serves as the institution, not the central. Meaning there isn't anybody else involved in that.
Right, there is a distinction there, I think. I think that's one that we can question. Is it the only? Or is it the primary? Is it? Fair question. Rushdoony certainly presents it as the only proper. My guess is we all agree with the premise here.
We agree with the premise, but for what's going on out there, if you believe the world is presently overpopulated, for example, what you're going to do is you're going to question whether or not that's actually a good thing.
For us, it's just preparation, so that's a good thing. But there are plenty of people who question whether or not that's even good, any good. We shouldn't, maybe we need to take a break for a generation from procreating children because there's too many people in the world, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And who gets to decide that?
I guess they do.
The state would say they do. Interestingly, while I certainly would not argue that the family is the only appropriate and proper institution, and the nuclear, traditional, God-designed family, the state recognizes others. A couple weeks ago, I was in South Carolina for a wedding. My brother was getting married. And a coworker of his came and was part of the festivities, and I got to meet her and her wife. And in that discussion, this lesbian couple mentioned that here in a couple months they were going to start trying for a baby. Biologically, that doesn't happen. They're going to have to use some artificial means or adoption or something. But by God's design, the traditional nuclear family is at least between a man and a woman, is the only way to procreate. Biological fact. And then there's the rearing of that child that they're going to try for. As someone who grew up with lesbian parents of sorts, a mom and her girlfriend, bad idea. I've known plenty of folks who were raised in a similar situation. They are essentially terrible people. I am the exception to that rule by God's grace and God's grace alone. Even my own brother, my own biological brother that was raised in that same house, is a complete mess in large part because of his raising by two women. So I would very much argue that Rushdoony is correct here. It's the only way it can be done right. It's the only way. Stella, you had a thought?
If God wanted less people on the earth, there will be less people on the earth.
Agreed. The trouble is, there doesn't need less people on the earth. God has provided us plenty of resources to sustain everyone if we are responsible with those resources. So, given that very strongly motivated and opinionated caveat that I've given you, any other thoughts to this? Do we see the state usurping? John?
We see the state usurping on the rearing all the time. Everybody steps on eggshells with their kids today because you're worried about child protective services coming in and taking your kids away because somebody has a different idea about how they should be reared.
They have absolutely stepped out of their proper authorities in that respect. Any other ways we see the state usurping this?
Putting Planned Parenthood clinics in high schools. You're not allowed to question a child without his parents in a criminal investigation, but you're allowed to dispense contraceptives or abortions without their consent.
Yep. And that is a very much direct result of government intervention, where it ought not be. Talk about that a little bit more too here in a minute. Any other thoughts on this? Or did I monopolize that one? Again, I do personally have some very strong feelings on this. And I would hope for good reasons. Another interesting point on this one. During the campaign, we've probably all heard of Hillary Clinton in one of her books saying that basically parents should have a secondary role in child rearing and that it's really the government's responsibility to raise our children. There is some question as to whether that is actually in her book. I'm not going to go buy it to find out, but there's some question on that. But what is out there that she believes our what could have been our next president is a Washington Times article that addressed a 1977, an older report, from the Carnegie Council on Children, who at the time had employed Hillary Clinton as one of their researchers. And she wrote a section of that report and said, and the article, the Washington Times article, said that in the chapter that Ms. Clinton worked on, titled The Protection of Children's Rights, it reads, it has become necessary for society to make some piecemeal accommodations to prevent parents from denying certain privileges that society wants them to have. So who has the right here to decide what privileges children should and should not have?
According to this article, according to this report, she would say that the government decides that ultimately. Again, parents are then the servants of the state. So while the campaign quote may not be perfectly accurate, the sentiment is. And if you think that's reserved to the Democratic platform, take a real hard look at the Republican platform. Not going to be all that different. Third point that Rushdoony makes is that the family serves as man's first and basic school. Okay.
It's not the government's job to teach us, it's our parents' job.
Okay. Government typically picks up in this at age 5 or 6.
You start looking at kindergarten, first grade. Sometimes as late as 8 years old. Rushdoony would say that it begins even before that. That schooling, not necessarily in a formal manner, begins at home prior to typical government intervention.
Right. Lessons like that. Who teaches you that?
Mommy.
Mommy does.
Mommy and Mommy.
Mm-hmm. Your family. So, the status point, do we agree or disagree with Rushdoony on this?
Going back to Toby's question, okay, if the family isn't, then what is?
What is? What is? Seth?
I think it's even seen that this was certainly the sentiment of the founders of this nation in the fact that it was not because there was not academic information out there that many children didn't go to school past a certain grade or what we would consider to be middle school. It was not because there weren't qualified teachers. It was not because children were not smart enough to learn it. It was because it was very widely accepted and understood that while there was much benefit to continuing one's education past a middle school age, that most of the lessons that one needed to learn were going to be taught from the family and from working alongside the children's parents, and at that point also then being pushed into apprenticeship, which a lot of times was the trade of the father in the household anyways.
Right.
And so I think, yeah, not only do I think it's true, but I think it's been modeled for us in how the country was even founded. That there was a reason that you didn't have high schools back in the day in that sense. Because, again, I would argue much of the information taught in modern day high schools was already covered and known by a lot of these kids.
Right.
Just read some of the textbooks.
The standards were much higher back then. To piggyback off of that,
Many of those lessons taught at home in those latter years of what we would consider high school years were lessons that can't be taught in a school setting because they were lessons of character, morality, stability, hard work, ethics. We have seen that can't be done in a classroom. Ryan.
I think of the first school, I think that seems really obvious. You learn to talk, walk.
That's one of Rushdoony's key examples, is you're taking someone who knows no language and teaching them to speak.
The question I would have is why he would use the word basic school. Is that the best choice of words there?
Perhaps not. I think it is at least somewhat fitting, because language is basic. It's complicated, but without language,
It's hard to learn anything else, it's hard to communicate, especially anything more abstract requires that. And so it is basic school. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's relegated to basics. But those basics, if you don't have those, you really can't get into the more complicated topics of life.
Could it be also too, Ryan, that it has a lot to do with, when we say first in basic school, certainly instead of saying it covers the basics, but the reality is there may be things past the basics that I just simply don't know, which is why I may call you, or I may call John, or Sid, or somebody else, to gain that knowledge, or to even teach my children. That would have been one of the ways they would have put them in, an apprenticeship to say, well, look, I don't know, I don't have much skill in these, I don't know. I can teach you the basics of how you eat, live, function, but there are some things past the basics that I may, or we as parents may not be qualified or know yet, that we need to then find other means to educate them by. Is that possibly the meaning he's getting at? And that's how I would read it. I don't know if that's what the intent is.
I think that was probably his intent, was to leave room for specific training, apprenticeships, certain higher educations that are beyond the basic school. But again, I don't know that he would try to relegate the home as only the basic school. Stella.
Do you think Uncle Adam will change?
not outside the grace of God.
I don't know that he will. Any other thoughts on this, particularly in the usurpation of it? Alan?
First and basic would be pretty much non-negotiable, universally. And beyond that, I think it depends on the situation. As Seth pointed out, some people are, really capable of teaching something.
Sure.
So if our children want to learn that, they have to go somewhere else. So the first and basic, I think, is really the point here.
And I think it points out too that it's not the only legitimate school.
Well, I would say it is the only legitimate school for first and basic.
For first and basic, we're not the only.
I think we're not limited to that.
Right, but in the broadest scheme, it's not the only legitimate school.
Right.
At all.
Right. And it can go beyond that.
Sure.
But I think when you go beyond that, now you've opened up other options.
I would agree. Alan?
And actually, Liz, she used to work in a daycare, and she actually saw the usurpation of actually the basic learning, because even in the daycare setting of preschool, they're already trying to train them in what they need to know to be status at ages 3 and 4. And even the daycare, they took up to, I think, what they have known as newborns. So they're already trying to give their child to the state, even that young.
Right.
So they're going to be usurping it even when you're born to give them to the state.
The fact that schooling is legally mandatory, I think, is an overstepping
Of the government. The establishment of public schools is an overstepping of authority. Usurpation. Any other thoughts?
What Joel was saying in his sermon about, I mean, it is in the Pennsylvania Constitution, not the federal, that all children in Pennsylvania will be provided, that's not their scope of authority.
Right, it's outside of their.
Even if you want to homeschool or whatever, you need the state's permission.
Right.
So there's a usurpation right there.
And oddly enough, Pennsylvania is one of the hardest states to homeschool in. It has some of the heaviest homeschooling regulations of any state. I think there are only 1 or 2 that beat us out on that.
Do we know when that was put in the Constitution? It's hard for me to believe that was in there.
I don't know right off. Stella? Okay. Comes back in a minute.
Any other thoughts? I think Toby's about to look that up.
Any thoughts on this?
First in basic school. All right, point number 4. The family serves as the first government in the life of the child. Remember, government, not necessarily talking about a state structure. Government happens on many levels, and this is the first exposure to a government that a child would have. I would have to wonder if this is not part of rearing a child. Agree, disagree?
How's that?
This is super critical here. If you're going to define government as I do, as that which says no, then I mean, where else are you going to go? Adam and Eve were in the garden. One of the first things we know they learned was no. They didn't do it, but they learned it. They understood it. We now have child rearing experts that are telling us that we're not supposed to say no. It's really bizarre stuff that I can't even really explain. The importance of learning no can't be overestimated in any case at all. And the child learning no at home, and where else is the child actually going to learn it? Because you need reinforcement of no. A child needs to learn. There's so much connected with the word no. And we see that in Genesis 3. For example, it wasn't just no, it was like, and if you do this, then this is going to happen.
Consequences of...
Yeah, have to be connected with no. If you don't connect consequences with no, then no definitely does not mean no. Clearly not. Where else, again, are you going to do this? Sometimes no has to be customized to the child. Not all no to every child needs to necessarily look exactly the same. Well, how are you going to do that in a state school setting, in this mass setting that the state is always loved? You can't customize no. And one of the beautiful things I believe of a family is you can customize the. Because children are different, you can customize differently.
Right.
The important thing is that they all get it.
Right. And who knows the children?
Well enough to do that customization, but the parents, but the
Pay a
family.
bureaucrat enough to love my child like I do. You can't do it. Bureaucrats never love my child like I do.
Right. There's a vested interest that no one else has.
Can't pay.
Stella?
Mr. Toby said we have to have the government's permission to do homeschooling. Is that why mommy has to give a paper to the Lion Mission every year?
Yes, it is. That is exactly why. Toby, did you have something?
Looks like May 16th, 1967. Yeah, section B, subsection 14, the General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education to serve the needs of the Commonwealth. May 16th.
The fact that the government thinks they can do anything efficiently or thoroughly is a big choice.
Section 15, no money raised for the support of the public schools or Commonwealth shall be appropriated to or used for the support of any sectarian school.
So you gotta keep the religious nuts out of it. So,
Well, to play off this as well, what Jenny's saying is, not only is this where the child learns no, but they learn who rightly enforces that no. They learn hierarchy, they learn authority, they learn, I would argue, they're going to learn the biblical model here of from where law comes from and how law is established and defended. And that is what we are doing, is defending law, defending God's law against our children. because they are assaulting that wall, and they're seeking to overthrow it in their rebellious acts. And so it is our responsibility to defend God's law in our home and discipline our children and bring them back under the authority of that law by recognizing our authority as institution placed over them, as we recognize the authority of God's law which came from Him which is over us. So again, I mean, I think Joe's right. This is the part that can't be overstated or not. That not only do they know that they learn the authority structure as it's been handed down from God.
Civilization.
Civilization. Exactly. All right.
Seems like in the family, a child is able to learn the possibility, just done right, they will learn the possibility of a just and benevolent dictatorship, which is what they have to come to terms with God.
Yes.
But if the father is doing his job right, he will be modeling an all-powerful government that's still good.
Absolutely. And that's one thing I fear that most Christians neglect to realize is that we are under a benevolent dictatorship. Make no mistake. We talk about the Hebrew Republic and all these other different forms of government, but the bottom line is we are under benevolent dictatorship. And as fathers, and all this only happens within a healthy Christian family, we do model that. Not that we are all-powerful, but we are to be the highest authority in our family unit. We've been delegated that authority, and we've been given the responsibility with it to model that benevolence, but also the leadership of the dictatorship. Recognizing that it is still delegated, it's still under a higher authority.
So why don't we learn from the current government, why aren't we learning then as Christian fathers that we should be as quick to defend that government and law as what they are. Any threat to their form of law, they seek to quickly stamp out. And again, I think that's part of our problem as fathers, if we're honest, we tend to see our children's disobedience as simply, at times, either inconvenience or simply, well, they just don't want to do what I'm asking them to do because, they're just being, kids, they're just doing whatever they want to do. But if they are directly violating something that is in God's law, then it is an assault and it is an attack to overthrow God's law. And we don't often, or I should say we don't always, move as quickly to squash that sort of rebellion as what I think we should. And maybe I'm just, speaking to myself here on this, but how often we will kind of let it hang out there, or we've seen it, where people just let their children kind of hang out there without actually obeying what was commanded, which is a good and right biblical law. And then it's like, well, kids are just stubborn, or kids are just this, or
Make an excuse for it.
right. No, it's rebellion, and they're assaulting God's law, which, again, as John just said, we have been commissioned to uphold. We have been delegated the authority to make sure that within our realm, within the influence we have, especially within the kingdom of our household, we are executing the laws of the King faithfully.
John?
And to just follow through on that point, not just with our kids, but with the state, who is assaulting that very same authority.
That's right. Here.
And a lot of times we're more afraid of our government than our God.
I think because there is an immediacy, and frankly, because they have bigger guns, they have more.
And to that point, God's, we're supposed to fear God, right? Yeah. But the state demands and commands fear. It's a righteous fear for God. The state's fear is not. But doesn't it continue to reflect our own lack of belief in our hearts in that we see it in this way. We see that this is the really clear example, is when somebody does something really evil, right?
And that person is then, let's just say, killed. You have somebody that's terrorist against, kills a bunch of innocent people, then they're killed. And we go, man, it just doesn't seem though like they got real justice, or like they got, really coming to them. So many times I hear out of the mouths of professing Christians, and what it shows us, they don't really believe that God's judgment, which, is going to be eternal, is actually going to be we want to see the judgment and the penalty paid in this life, and so when we don't see it, we don't actually believe that the severity of God's judgment is far less than anything we can even imagine. And so because of that, and I want to go back to what Toby said, we fear the state because, man, they might lock me up, or they might torture my family, or they might do all these awful things to me, but overall I'm not believing exactly what John said. I'm not believing that God's judgment is actually far more severe on those who do such things than what they would ever do to us here in this life. And I think it's back to really believing God is true.
Yep. The state may have bigger guns than we have, but God's got bigger.
It is true. The trouble for us is that we don't see them, and there's an unbelief on our part. And what that results in is
a fear of men over a fear of God. And I am guilty of it as well. There are things that I feel I should be doing or should be willing to do that I do not because I don't want to get locked up, because I've got to protect my family. I've got to provide for my family. And so I stand idle, and I'm not sure that I should. Not easy questions to wrestle with. But it's ones that we will have to answer if we are to stop the usurpation by the state in every respect. And it comes to some nasty business. I'm afraid that's what it will come to. Perhaps not, I pray not. But there's going to be nasty business involved in any way, because anytime you stand up to the state, you're a traitor. It's treasonous. So they treat you as such.
they take it seriously.
But we haven't for far too long. And so we've gotten ourselves into a bad spot as Christians because we've not done our duty to stop the state early on.
Don't worry about it. Just go. He's thinking about her. He's thinking about her.
God knows my heart. That's part of my fear.
That's what John and I talked about this. That's what's gotten us here. Is as Christians, when these things come up, we just go, you know what? Just go with it. Don't cause a big scene, because God knows your heart. Anyways, He knows that if you let it go, He knows you don't really agree with it. He knows your heart. And so we take the easy way out, and we don't actually stand up because we go, yeah, God knows my heart. I think that's wrong. I don't do anything about it, but I think it's wrong. And now here we are.
Yep. That phrase has done us a great service. And it's reflected in a lot of our literature.
This will be the last point I make, but to follow up on that, I was going through the Chronicles of Narnia, something that we celebrate. C.S. Lewis was a fantastic writer. I don't know that his theology was always spot on, though. Because one of the things in one of those books is there's this false worshiper, a soldier, for, I forget the guy's name,
Is this in the last battle?
I forget which one.
He thinks he serves Baal.
Not Baal, but it's a false god.
Yeah.
And Aslan comes on the scene, confronts him and this other follower of Aslan, of God. And Aslan says, what this guy did in the name of Tarshish, I don't think it was Tarshish, Tarshan. Tash. Thank you. What he had done in the name of Tash, because of his honesty, because he truly believed it, I count it as having been done in my name. God doesn't do that. Aslan knew his heart. God does not look on it that favorably. God will not
take what you do honestly in the name of Satan and count it as having done it for him. He does not do that. He is far more exclusive. And so we have that concept even in some of our greatest Christian literature. Ouch. So we have to be careful of even the good literature that we let our kids read. Perhaps we need to read a lot more of it with them, pointing at myself. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, rebuttals? Very good. Jim, would you mind closing this in a word of prayer?
Our Father, we thank you for this time we've had together today. We thank you for the time of worship and preaching and for the Sunday school class. Lord, we pray that you enable each of us, according to whatever station you've given us in the family at this point, we pray that you enable each of us to look at that biblically and to act on it biblically. And Lord, we pray that you will watch over us and our families as we go our separate ways until we gather together again. We pray in Christ's name.
Amen. Next week, we will not be having Sunday school because it is Christmas Eve, but the following week, we will be coming back to finish up this lesson.